Robert Walton writes to his sister, Margaret Saville, to reassure her of his safety and share his enthusiasm for his upcoming Arctic expedition. Walton dreams of discovering a northern passage and unlocking scientific secrets, such as the mystery of magnetism. He envisions the Arctic as a place of beauty and potential rather than desolation. Walton recounts his childhood fascination with exploration, fueled by his uncle's library, and his 6 years of rigorous preparation, including voyages on whaling ships and the study of science and navigation. Despite moments of doubt, he feels driven by the glory and global impact of his mission. He plans to leave for Archangel soon, hire a ship, and set sail in June, uncertain of when or if he will return. He bids his sister a heartfelt farewell, asking for her prayers as he embarks on this perilous journey. Robert Walton updates his sister, Margaret Saville, on the progress of his Arctic expedition. He has secured a vessel and is assembling a courageous crew, including a spirited lieutenant and a noble shipmaster known for his integrity and kindness. Walton admires the master's generosity, sharing a story of how he sacrificed his wealth and prospects to help a woman marry the man she loved. Despite his preparations, Walton feels deeply lonely, lamenting the absence of a true friend to share in his triumphs or console him in failure. He reflects on his impulsive nature, his self-directed education, and his longing for intellectual and emotional companionship. As the weather begins to thaw, Walton grows increasingly eager yet anxious about his journey into the unknown. He expresses both fear and excitement at the challenges ahead, referencing the rhyme of the ancient mariner as inspiration for his passion for exploration. He ends with a tender farewell, asking Margaret to keep writing to him and to remember him fondly if he does not return. In this short letter, Robert Walton writes to his sister, Margaret Saville, from aboard his ship as he advances on his Arctic voyage. He is safe and optimistic about the journey despite the dangers of navigating through icy waters. The crew remains courageous, and the southern summer gales provide a surprising warmth, aiding their progress. Walton mentions that no major events have occurred, aside from minor maritime issues such as a few gales and a leaking ship, which are common and unremarkable to seasoned sailors. He assures Margaret that he will exercise caution and avoid unnecessary risks, even while he remains determined to achieve success. Walton expresses his confidence in human willpower and perseverance, marveling at the ability to conquer nature's challenges. He concludes the letter with an affectionate farewell to his sister. Robert Walton writes to his sister, Mrs. Saville, about an extraordinary incident during his Arctic expedition. On July 31st, the ship became trapped in ice, surrounded by an unbroken expanse of frozen plains and enveloped in dense fog. As they waited for a change in the weather, the fog cleared around 2 p.m., revealing an astonishing sight: a large figure, seemingly of gigantic stature, riding a sledge pulled by dogs, traveling northward across the ice. This mysterious traveler disappeared into the distance, and the crew marveled at the impossibility of such a sight in such a desolate location. 2 hours later, the ice began to break apart, and the ship was freed by nightfall. The crew waited until daylight to navigate safely through the loose ice. The following morning, the sailors discovered another sledge drifting towards the ship on a fragment of ice. Only one dog remained alive, and the sledge carried an emaciated, half-frozen man who spoke English with a foreign accent. The man, before agreeing to board, asked Walton about the ship's destination. When Walton explained their voyage toward the North Pole, the stranger consented to join them. The man was in dire physical condition, nearly frozen and exhausted. The crew tried to carry him below deck, but the lack of fresh air caused him to faint. They revived him with brandy, soup, and blankets, and after 2 days of care, his health began to improve. Despite his frailty, the stranger's demeanor intrigued Walton. His eyes often reflected wildness and despair, yet moments of kindness brought a fleeting warmth and sweetness to his expression. When the sailors questioned the stranger about his journey, he disclosed that he was pursuing someone who had fled from him. Walton shared that they had seen another sledge, which heightened the stranger's interest. He asked numerous questions about the direction the figure had taken, calling the person he pursued a daemon. In private, the stranger acknowledged Walton's kindness and expressed a desire to tell his story, but Walton refrained from pressing him for details. The stranger showed signs of renewed purpose, frequently watching from the deck for the other sledge, though Walton urged him to rest due to his fragile condition. By August 13th, Walton had developed a strong affection for the stranger, describing him as a noble and cultivated man whose wisdom, eloquence, and gentle nature were evident despite his profound grief. The stranger's suffering evoked Walton's pity and admiration, and Walton lamented the misery that had transformed such a remarkable person into a shadow of his former self. The letter concludes with Walton promising to continue documenting any new developments related to the stranger. The narrator, Victor Frankenstein, begins by detailing his distinguished ancestry in Geneva. His father, a respected public figure, marries later in life due to his dedication to public service. Victor's father exemplifies honor and loyalty, especially evident in his relationship with his friend Beaufort. Beaufort, once a wealthy merchant, falls into poverty and retreats to Lucerne with his daughter Caroline. Unable to cope with his misfortune, Beaufort succumbs to illness and despair, leaving Caroline destitute. Victor's father discovers their plight, cares for Caroline after Beaufort's death, and ultimately marries her. This union is characterized by a deep sense of respect, gratitude, and devotion. Victor is born during his parents' travels through Italy and is raised in an environment of love and responsibility. His parents' strong moral compass and dedication to his upbringing profoundly influence him. However, his mother longs for a daughter, and during a visit to a poor family near Lake Como, she is struck by the beauty and grace of a young girl named Elizabeth Lavenza. Elizabeth, of noble descent but orphaned and impoverished, is adopted by Victor's family. She is raised as Victor's more-than-sister, a cherished addition to their lives. Victor Frankenstein reflects on his idyllic childhood and the profound influences that shaped his intellectual pursuits and character. Raised in harmony with Elizabeth Lavenza, his adoptive cousin, Victor describes their complementary temperaments. While Elizabeth was serene, imaginative, and deeply moved by the beauty of nature, Victor was passionate, analytical, and consumed by a desire to uncover the secrets of the world. Their contrasting dispositions strengthen their bond, fostering a relationship of mutual admiration and support. Victor also introduces his closest friend, Henry Clerval, the son of a Geneva merchant. Unlike Victor's scientific curiosity, Henry was drawn to literature, chivalry, and tales of heroism. He was an imaginative, adventurous boy who dreamed of making a mark on humanity through noble deeds. Together with Elizabeth, Henry played a key role in shaping Victor's moral outlook, balancing his fervent intellectual pursuits with a sense of empathy and human connection. Victor reminisces about his parents, whose kindness and indulgence created a nurturing home environment. He contrasts this with the stricter households of his peers, acknowledging his gratitude for the loving upbringing that encouraged his curiosity and individuality. Despite his violent temper and intense passions, Victor's energies were channeled toward learning and discovery rather than frivolous pursuits. He was uninterested in subjects like languages or politics, but was instead captivated by the metaphysical and physical mysteries of existence. Victor recalls a pivotal moment at age 13 when, during a family trip to Tonon, he stumbled upon a book by Cornelius Agrippa. Fascinated by Agrippa's ideas, Victor eagerly shared his discovery with his father, only to be dismissed with a casual remark that the book was outdated nonsense. This response, Victor believes, marked a turning point in his life. Rather than deterring him, his father's dismissal fueled his curiosity, leading him to explore the works of Agrippa, Paracelsus, and Albertus Magnus, authors who delved into mystical and alchemical philosophies. These early readings sparked Victor's obsession with uncovering the secrets of nature. He found modern science uninspiring, perceiving it as limited and superficial compared to the bold, imaginative theories of the older philosophers. Victor yearned to transcend the barriers of human understanding and penetrate the citadel of nature. This yearning, he later reflects, became the foundation for his tragic fate. His uncritical acceptance of the alchemists' claims and his dissatisfaction with contemporary scientific advancements set him on a path toward his eventual downfall. Victor's recollections underscore the seeds of his ambition and foreshadow the catastrophic consequences of his relentless pursuit of knowledge. As he describes his childhood and formative experiences, he acknowledges the profound impact these influences had on shaping his destiny. Chapter 3 continues the narrative of Victor Frankenstein's life, marking his transition from his sheltered upbringing in Geneva to his life as a student at the University of Ingolstadt. The chapter highlights significant emotional events and key encounters that shape his future, particularly his relationship with science. The chapter opens with the tragic death of Victor's mother, following a heroic yet reckless attempt to care for Elizabeth, who was gravely ill with scarlet fever. This loss marks a profound turning point in Victor's life, leading him to reluctantly depart for Ingolstadt to continue his education. His mother's death leaves an indelible void, and Victor grapples with his grief, though he tries to focus on his future and the duties left behind. Elizabeth, despite her own sorrow, takes on the role of comforting the family and fulfilling the duties of the household, reinforcing her central role in Victor's life. As Victor travels to Ingolstadt, he is consumed by melancholy and self-reflection, but his spirits lift once he arrives and begins to immerse himself in academic life. At the university, he first meets Professor Krempe, a dismissive and harsh figure who criticizes Victor's prior studies in alchemy. Krempe's contempt for these ancient teachings causes Victor to reconsider his past beliefs, but the professor's aggressive demeanor only reinforces Victor's sense of alienation. However, his encounter with Professor Waldman proves to be more transformative. Waldman is a kind and inspiring figure who speaks passionately about modern chemistry and the progress made in scientific fields, particularly in terms of understanding nature's secrets. Waldman's words ignite something deep within Victor, rekindling his fascination with science and pushing him toward a singular goal: to push the boundaries of human knowledge and explore new, uncharted realms of science. Victor is swept up in this renewed purpose, determined to surpass the limits of what science has already achieved. His meeting with Waldman sets the stage for his eventual obsession with uncovering the mysteries of life itself, a journey that will lead to his tragic downfall. This chapter sets the foundation for Victor's scientific ambitions and hints at the darker path he will follow. His initial enthusiasm for learning is now accompanied by a growing sense of destiny, and the stage is set for the fateful decisions that will lead to the creation of his monstrous creation. In Chapter 4, Victor Frankenstein delves deeper into his early intellectual development, reflecting on how his obsession with understanding life and death began. From a young age, he was captivated by the natural world and the secrets it held, leading him to pursue knowledge with an intensity that would shape the rest of his life. He recalls being influenced by the works of ancient and contemporary philosophers, particularly those who explored the boundaries of life. Initially, he was fascinated by the alchemists of the past, who sought to unlock the secrets of nature and transformation, but he quickly became disillusioned with their vague and fanciful theories. Victor then turned to more recent philosophers and scientists, whose principles seemed more grounded in empirical research. However, he finds himself frustrated by their limitations. While they made significant strides in understanding the natural world, Victor feels they fall short of fully understanding the potential to manipulate life itself. He begins to believe that the key to life lies beyond their grasp, in a realm that only he could explore. His studies become increasingly grisly as he immerses himself in charnel houses and graveyards where human remains are stored. He is not repulsed by the decaying bodies. Instead, he views them as crucial sources of knowledge. His fascination with the human form drives him to dissect and study corpses, eagerly learning the secrets of life and death through these gruesome practices. In the dissecting room, Victor becomes even more obsessed, convinced that the key to reanimating life lies within his reach. He disregards the moral implications of his work, driven solely by the pursuit of knowledge. For Victor, the acquisition of scientific understanding becomes an all-consuming passion, one that justifies any means, even the most horrific and unnatural, to achieve his goal. In Chapter 5 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein achieves the culmination of his scientific endeavors when he brings his creation to life, but the moment quickly turns to horror and disgust. Late at night, amidst a dreary, rain-soaked atmosphere, he gathers the instruments of life and animates the creature. When its yellow eye opens and it breathes, Victor experiences a mixture of elation and repulsion. He had worked tirelessly for nearly 2 years to perfect this being, yet upon seeing it come to life, the beauty he envisioned vanishes, replaced by a sense of dread. The creature's appearance is far from the idealized form he intended. Its yellow skin, shriveled complexion, watery eyes, and black lips create a grotesque contrast to the features Victor had chosen, rendering it a monster in his eyes. Victor, overwhelmed by horror and disgust, flees from the room. Unable to sleep, he experiences unsettling dreams that blur the line between his loved ones and death. He envisions Elizabeth as a living, vibrant figure, but her appearance transforms into that of a corpse, wrapped in a shroud. He wakes from this nightmare only to see the creature standing by his bed, its grotesque features fixed upon him. In a panic, Victor escapes into the streets, where he spends the rest of the night in agitation, fearing the monster might be following him. The horror of his creation stays with him the next morning as he roams the streets of Ingolstadt in a daze, the rain mirroring his inner turmoil. He describes the experience with a reference to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, likening himself to someone fleeing a terrifying fiend. His dread intensifies when he encounters Henry Clerval, a childhood friend who has just arrived in Ingolstadt. Clerval's arrival temporarily brings Victor peace, as he is reminded of home and family. However, Victor still struggles with his internal horror. Despite his joy at seeing Clerval, his physical appearance betrays his ill health, and Clerval notices his pale, gaunt appearance. Victor's emotions spiral as he attempts to hide the truth from his friend, struggling to suppress thoughts of the creature. When Clerval insists on accompanying him to his apartment, Victor is forced to confront his fears. He rushes upstairs, dreading what he might find, but to his relief, the creature is gone. Victor, overwhelmed by his good fortune, rejoices, though his mental state remains fragile. His erratic behavior and wild laughter alarm Clerval, who begins to suspect that something far more serious is troubling his friend. Victor's mental and physical breakdown progresses into a nervous fever that keeps him bedridden for several months. Clerval assumes the role of Victor's sole caretaker, hiding the severity of his condition from Victor's family in order to spare them further worry. As Victor recovers, his thoughts remain dominated by the image of the creature. Clerval, though initially puzzled by Victor's ramblings, soon comes to understand that Victor's illness stems from the terrifying event of creating life. Gradually, Victor regains his health, aided by the spring weather and Clerval's unwavering care. His spirits lift, and he expresses his gratitude to Clerval for his kindness. Clerval, seeing that his friend is finally recovering, gently brings up a matter that has been troubling him, the fact that Victor has not written to his family in a long time. This reminder of home brings a moment of relief to Victor, though he remains deeply troubled by the events surrounding the creature he created. This chapter emphasizes Victor's psychological unraveling after the completion of his experiment. His initial triumph is quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming consequences of his actions, leading him to suffer both physically and mentally. The creature, though absent in this chapter, looms large in Victor's mind, symbolizing the catastrophic results of his unchecked ambition. In Chapter 6 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein receives a letter from his fiancée, Elizabeth Lavenza, which provides him with an update on his family and his health. Elizabeth expresses deep concern for Victor's illness, which she believes has been only partially alleviated by Henry Clerval's constant letters. Despite her worries, she remains hopeful that he will soon recover and assures him that his family is in good health, including his father and younger brother, Ernest. She mentions the growing up of their little brother William, describing him as a cheerful and healthy boy with blue eyes and dimples. She also gives Victor news about her own family, including Justine Moritz, a servant girl taken in by the Frankenstein family. Elizabeth recounts Justine's tragic history, describing how her mother mistreated her and the hardships she endured, including the death of her family members and her mother's subsequent guilt. Elizabeth concludes by asking Victor to write to reassure them and expresses gratitude to Henry for his care. After reading Elizabeth's letter, Victor is filled with affection for her and resolves to write back immediately, even though he is still physically weak. Writing exhausts him, but it marks the beginning of his recovery, and within 2 weeks, he is well enough to leave his room. One of his first tasks is to introduce Henry to the university professors, although the encounter brings him psychological discomfort. Victor has developed an intense aversion to natural philosophy, the field that once consumed him, especially anything related to chemistry. The sight of chemical instruments and discussions about science cause him great distress. Henry, noticing this, removes all of Victor's scientific equipment from his sight and even changes his living arrangements. Despite these efforts, Victor cannot escape the painful reminders of his past work. When Professor Waldman praises Victor's scientific progress, he speaks with warmth and kindness, unaware of the trauma the subject causes Victor. Although Victor suffers internally, he hides his pain and does not reveal the true source of his discomfort. Meanwhile, Clerval is sympathetic but tactfully avoids the subject of natural philosophy, suggesting instead that they focus on other interests. However, Professor Krempe, less perceptive of Victor's emotional state, harshly comments on Victor's previous enthusiasm for the alchemist Cornelius Agrippa and sarcastically praises his modesty. This conversation only adds to Victor's distress, as it brings him face to face with his past mistakes and the man who once derided him. While Clerval pursues an interest in Oriental languages, hoping to travel to the East and pursue a distinguished career, Victor turns to the study of these languages as well. He does not seek to master them as Clerval does, but finds solace in their melancholy poetry and comforting themes, using them as a distraction from his dark memories. Victor's time in Ingolstadt passes with a mixture of academic studies and personal torment, and by the end of the chapter, his planned return to Geneva is delayed by winter weather. Though he is eager to return to his family and home, he reluctantly remains in Ingolstadt to support Clerval, who is still adjusting to the unfamiliar city. Victor Frankenstein receives a letter from his father, Alphonse, informing him of a tragic event. Alphonse begins by expressing concern for Victor's return, knowing the joy he anticipated from the letter will soon turn to sorrow. He carefully prepares Victor for the devastating news. William, Victor's younger brother, has been murdered. Alphonse recounts the circumstances surrounding William's disappearance and death. On May 7th, Alphonse, his niece, and his two sons, Victor's brothers, took a walk in Plain-Palais. The evening was warm and serene, and they walked farther than usual, enjoying the tranquility. As evening fell, William and Ernest, who had gone ahead, could not be found. After searching in the growing darkness, Ernest returned alone, explaining that William had run off to hide while they were playing. Despite waiting and looking for a long time, William did not return. The family continued searching into the night, and by morning, Alphonse found William's lifeless body in the grass, his neck bearing the mark of a strangler. The family was heartbroken, and Elizabeth, who was with Alphonse, immediately blamed herself upon seeing the body. She explained that William had been wearing a miniature portrait of their mother, a valuable item that was likely the motive for the crime. The family is unable to find any trace of the murderer, though they continue searching. Alphonse calls for Victor to return to comfort Elizabeth, who is overwhelmed by guilt, and reflects on how glad he is that Victor's mother didn't have to witness the death of their beloved son. Alphonse concludes the letter asking Victor to return, not with vengeance in mind, but with peace to help heal the family's suffering. Victor, overwhelmed by grief, is unable to hide his despair, which surprises his friend, Henry Clerval, who had been with him when he received the letter. Clerval expresses his sympathy and asks Victor what he plans to do. Victor decides to immediately return to Geneva, and Clerval accompanies him to arrange for travel. The journey is somber, and although Victor initially longs to console his family, he becomes gripped by fear and uncertainty as he nears his hometown. The change in his surroundings over 6 years, the loss of William, and the general fear of change overwhelm him. Victor's journey continues in a melancholic state, but the peaceful scene by Lake Geneva and the sight of the mountains temporarily restore his spirits, bringing him a fleeting sense of calm and a nostalgic connection to his homeland. However, as he draws closer to Geneva, fear and grief again rise within him, and he begins to anticipate that he is about to experience profound suffering. When he arrives near the city, it is too late to enter, and he stays the night in Secheron. Unable to rest, he decides to visit the location where William was murdered, crossing the lake in a boat to reach Plain-Palais. There, Victor is struck by the intensity of a storm raging across the mountains. As he watches, a figure emerges from the darkness, and a flash of lightning reveals the monstrous creature he created, the creature, whose horrific form confirms Victor's worst fear. He believes that the creature is responsible for William's murder. This terrifying encounter drives him to pursue the creature, but it quickly disappears into the night, scaling the nearby Mont Salève and vanishing. Victor is left stunned by the implications of this encounter. He contemplates the consequences of his actions, realizing that he may have unleashed a monster capable of terrible evil. His thoughts spiral into despair, as he realizes that the creature is not just a tragic creation, but a malevolent force that has now taken the life of his brother. He considers the creature a vampire, or spirit let loose from the grave, bent on destroying everything he holds dear. Victor spends the rest of the night in anguish, reflecting on the horror he has unleashed into the world. As dawn breaks, he makes his way back to Geneva, determined to confront the consequences of his actions. However, his mind is clouded with dread, and he feels the weight of the tragedy unfolding around him. This chapter marks a pivotal moment in Victor's journey, as he not only learns of William's murder, but also begins to suspect that his creation, the creature, is responsible for the crime, setting the stage for the conflict that will drive the rest of the novel. In Chapter 8 of Frankenstein, the trial of Justine Moritz, accused of murdering William Frankenstein, begins, and Victor Frankenstein's torment intensifies as he is forced to witness the proceedings. The chapter details Victor's overwhelming guilt, as he knows that the true murderer is the creature he created, but he is powerless to stop Justine's condemnation. Justine, though accused of a horrific crime, maintains a calm and dignified demeanor. She is dressed in mourning and stands confidently in court, though her appearance is restrained and she appears to be forcing her composure. Despite the public's hostility toward her, she does not tremble, though a tear briefly forms when she notices Victor's family in the crowd. The trial begins with the prosecutor presenting evidence against Justine, including her confusing and nervous behavior after the murder and her possession of a portrait of William, which was found in her pocket. In her defense, Justine explains that she had been out the night of the murder and had spent the night searching for the missing child, unaware that she had unknowingly been near the spot where William's body was found. She is confused about how the picture came to be in her pocket and insists that she is innocent, offering a plausible account of events, but acknowledging that the evidence against her is damning. Her defense is bolstered by testimonies from several witnesses who speak highly of her character, but public fear and prejudice overshadow their statements. Elizabeth, in a desperate attempt to save Justine, passionately vouches for her innocence, describing her as kind-hearted, loyal, and devoted to her family. Elizabeth's plea elicits murmurs of sympathy, but it does little to sway the public's opinion, and Justine is condemned. Victor, who knows the true culprit is the creature, is consumed with guilt and anguish. Unable to bear the injustice, he leaves the court in despair. The following morning, Victor learns that the verdict has been passed and Justine has confessed to the crime. The news shocks him, as he suspects her confession is false, coerced under duress. Justine's confession adds to the public's certainty of her guilt, and Victor is torn between the horrifying possibility of revealing the truth about the creature and the fear of being branded insane. Elizabeth, devastated by the news, visits Justine in prison to offer comfort. Justine, overcome with grief, admits that her confession was a lie made under pressure from her confessor, who threatened her with excommunication and hellfire if she did not confess. She explains that she could not withstand the pressure and falsely confessed to the crime in order to receive absolution. Justine expresses her deep regret for the lie, but she finds solace in the thought of being reunited with William in heaven. Elizabeth, heartbroken and still in denial about Justine's guilt, vows to prove her innocence. Justine, resigned to her fate, consoles Elizabeth and expresses hope that she will soon be in a better place, free from the misery and injustice of her earthly life. Despite her confession, which she later revealed to be coerced, Justine was sentenced to death and executed by hanging, a tragic end to her unjust trial. In Chapter 9 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is consumed by a deep sense of despair and remorse following Justine's unjust execution. The chapter opens with Victor reflecting on the crushing psychological toll of the aftermath. The initial chaos of recent events has given way to a paralyzing, hopeless calm that torments his mind. He feels overwhelmed by guilt for his role in the deaths of his brother, William, and Justine, even though he is not the direct cause of her execution. His conscience is burdened with the belief that his creation, the monster, is responsible for these deaths, and he fears that further tragedies will follow. Victor withdraws from society, plagued by a sense of impending doom. His health deteriorates, and he seeks solace in solitude, avoiding human interaction. His father notices the change in him and attempts to offer counsel, urging him to overcome his sorrow for the sake of his family. But Victor is trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to reconcile his feelings of guilt with his father's advice. The family moves to their house at Belrive, which offers Victor a sense of physical freedom from the constraints of Geneva. He often takes solitary boat trips on the lake at night, contemplating suicide as a way to escape his internal torment. However, his thoughts of Elizabeth, his father, and his remaining family prevent him from following through. Despite this, Victor continues to be tormented by the fear that the monster will harm those he loves. Elizabeth, too, is deeply affected by Justine's death. She expresses her sorrow and disbelief at the injustice of the situation, and her idealistic view of the world has been shattered. She confesses to Victor that she can no longer see the world as she once did, now viewing people with suspicion and seeing humanity as tainted by evil. However, she also affirms her belief in Justine's innocence, which further compounds Victor's guilt. He listens to Elizabeth's words, but his own anguish is so consuming that he cannot be consoled. Victor then decides to take a journey to the Alpine valleys, hoping that the grandeur and permanence of nature will offer him some respite from his grief. He travels through the valleys and mountains, reflecting on how the majestic scenery reminds him of his happier, more carefree youth. Yet, despite these beautiful surroundings, Victor cannot escape his inner turmoil, and his anguish returns when he reflects on the monster and the irreversible damage it has caused. Eventually, Victor reaches the village of Chamonix, exhausted both physically and mentally. He is momentarily distracted by the sight of Mont Blanc and the surrounding natural beauty, but even here, in this peaceful setting, his sorrow continues to overwhelm him. He is unable to find true solace, and the chapter concludes with him lying in bed, finding brief relief in sleep, but still haunted by his thoughts. In Chapter 10 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein spends a day in the valley near Montanvert, finding solace in the grandeur of nature. He stands beside the sources of the Arveyron, a glacier, observing the majestic mountains, ice, and the silent power of nature. The scene provides him with some comfort, lifting his spirits and offering a temporary escape from his grief. However, when he wakes up the next morning, his mood darkens, and heavy rain obscures the mountains. Despite the storm, he decides to ascend Montanvert alone, remembering how the glacier had once filled him with awe and joy. The ascent is difficult and desolate, with evidence of past avalanches and a treacherous path. As Victor climbs higher, he reflects on the contrast between human sensibilities and the simpler, more natural instincts of animals. Reaching the top by noon, he crosses the glacier, marveling at the spectacular sight of Mont Blanc. While contemplating the vast, ice-filled landscape, Victor is suddenly confronted by the horrifying figure of the monster he created. The creature seems to glide over the ice with unnatural speed, and as it approaches, its appearance becomes even more grotesque and terrifying. In a fit of rage and horror, Victor attempts to confront the creature, vowing to destroy it. However, the monster calmly speaks, expressing its deep misery and anger at Victor's rejection. It recounts how it was once benevolent, but became a fiend due to isolation and mistreatment. The creature begs Victor to listen to its story, hoping that by doing so, it can change its fate and secure some peace. After seeing the creature approaching with what seems like superhuman speed, Frankenstein is initially filled with rage and horror. He expresses his detestation for the creature, calling him a devil, and demanding that he leave. Frankenstein's emotions are overwhelming, and he wishes he could erase the creature's existence, both to rid himself of the horror it causes and to make amends for the lives the creature has destroyed. His words are filled with hatred, and he even wishes he could trample the creature to dust to undo the damage it has caused. The creature, however, responds with a calm, resigned tone. He tells Frankenstein that he expected such a reception. He acknowledges that all humans hate the wretched, and therefore he understands that Frankenstein despises him as his creator. Yet, the creature points out a paradox. Frankenstein created him, and they are bound together by the ties of creation, ties that cannot be severed unless one of them dies. The creature offers Frankenstein a choice. If he fulfills his duty to the creature, he will leave both him and mankind in peace. But if he refuses, the creature will exact vengeance, not just on Frankenstein, but on those around him. Frankenstein's response is full of fury. He rejects the creature's argument, calling it a wretched devil and accusing it of committing crimes so heinous that no punishment could be too severe. He again expresses a desire to end the creature's life, believing that doing so would not only rid him of his misery, but somehow restore the victims the creature has claimed. Frankenstein's hatred blinds him to any possibility of understanding or compassion for the creature. The creature, undeterred by Frankenstein's rage, asks for understanding. He pleads for Frankenstein to listen to his side of the story, reasoning that he has suffered enough already. The creature admits that life, although painful, is still precious to him, and he will defend his existence. He urges Frankenstein to remember that he is more powerful than him, and yet he does not wish to fight him. Instead, he offers to be docile and humble to Frankenstein if the creator fulfills his part of their contract. The creature continues, explaining the agony of being shunned and rejected by humanity. He was benevolent and good at first, but constant rejection turned him into a fiend. He confesses his misery, saying that he has been excluded from all forms of happiness and human connection. His refuge is the desolate mountains, where even though humans would seek his destruction, he feels less rejected by nature than by mankind. The creature argues that he deserves compassion, not hatred, because he was made this way by Frankenstein. If only his creator would fulfill his duty, the creature believes that he could live a life of peace away from human society without causing harm. At this point, the creature's words begin to have an effect on Frankenstein. He recalls the circumstances of his creation and is filled with disgust and guilt. However, the creature's appeal for understanding and his expression of loneliness and despair make Frankenstein reconsider. The creature asks for Frankenstein to listen to his tale, to understand the reasoning behind his actions. Frankenstein, though still filled with rage, is moved by the creature's plea and agrees, though begrudgingly, to hear the creature's story. The creature suggests that they retire to a nearby hut where they can speak more comfortably. He stresses that the sun is still high in the sky, meaning they have time before it sets. The creature lays out the stakes. Frankenstein must listen to his story, and in return, he promises to leave humanity in peace. If Frankenstein refuses, the creature will exact his revenge, causing even more suffering and death, not just for Frankenstein, but for everyone he holds dear. Victor is initially consumed by anger and refuses to listen, but the creature's plea eventually stirs a sense of compassion in him. The monster proposes a deal. If Victor listens to its tale, it will leave mankind alone and not seek revenge. Victor, though still filled with hatred, agrees to hear the creature's story, as he seeks confirmation of the monster's involvement in the murder of his brother. The chapter ends with Victor following the creature across the ice, uncertain of what he will hear, but conflicted by a mix of curiosity, compassion, and the unresolved weight of his responsibility as the creature's creator. In Chapter 11 of Frankenstein, the creature reflects on his early experiences and increasing awareness. He begins by describing the confusion of his initial sensations, his senses overwhelmed as he tried to distinguish between what he saw, heard, felt, and smelled. He also speaks about his first encounters with light, warmth, and the dark, all of which were sensations he could not yet fully understand. The creature's exploration starts in a forest near Ingolstadt, where he finds a brook to drink from and berries to eat. After sleeping in the forest, he wakes up cold and frightened, but his curiosity and growing awareness drive him forward. The moon becomes a key symbol in this chapter as the creature observes it with wonder and uses it to navigate the darkness. He begins to discern more distinct elements of his surroundings, identifying trees, insects, and other natural elements, gradually gaining more understanding of his environment. He also tries and fails to mimic the bird's songs, which marks a painful acknowledgement of his own limitations. Later, the creature discovers fire left by beggars and is amazed by its warmth, even though he burns himself when he touches it. He starts experimenting with fire, learning its properties, such as how wet wood can dry out and ignite. Through trial and error, he learns how to make fire, which serves as both a source of warmth and a way to cook food, though his efforts to cook berries are unsuccessful while some nuts improve. As his journey continues, he faces growing hunger and searches for more food, eventually leaving his original location to seek a place where his needs can be met. The creature's travels bring him to a small hut where an old man is preparing breakfast. The sight of the man frightens the creature, and the old man flees in terror, which causes the creature to realize his terrifying appearance to humans. Despite the rejection, the creature finds solace in the hut's shelter, the warmth from the fire, and the remnants of the old man's meal, which he consumes in a ravenous state. After sleeping in the hut, the creature wakes to continue his journey and arrives in a village. The sights of the village, neat houses, gardens, and food fascinate him, but when he enters a house, the villagers react with fear, and he is driven away. He finds refuge in a low hovel next to a cottage, which is small but dry and more comfortable than the forest. As the creature continues to observe the family in the cottage, he becomes deeply fascinated by their interactions. The elderly man, who is blind, seems to be a wise figure in the family, and the creature is especially struck by the affection and care shown by the younger members, particularly the young girl and the man. The creature watches as they share a meal, and despite their apparent poverty, there is an undeniable warmth in their gestures. He also observes their routines, noting how they work together to maintain their home and look after one another. The young man plays music, and the creature listens intently, captivated by the soothing sounds, which stir in him a longing for connection. He begins to identify with the family and, in particular, the young girl, who seems to exhibit kindness and compassion in her interactions with the elderly man. The creature's desire to engage with the family grows, and he becomes increasingly aware of the love they share. His feelings of isolation and alienation intensify as he compares their closeness to his own sense of abandonment and loneliness. The creature begins to fantasize about revealing himself to them, imagining that his presence could be welcomed if only they understood his true nature. However, the harsh reality of his appearance, along with the societal rejection he has faced, makes him hesitant to approach them directly. He feels conflicted between his yearning for human connection and his fear of being rejected because of his monstrous form. In Chapter 12 of Frankenstein, the creature reflects on his observations of the cottagers, a family he has been secretly watching for some time. He lies in his straw-filled hovel, unable to sleep as he processes the events of the previous day. He is struck by the kindness and gentle manners of the cottagers, which contrast sharply with the brutality he had suffered at the hands of villagers. However, despite his desire to join them, he feels too fearful of being rejected and resolves to remain hidden, studying their behavior from a distance. The cottagers' daily routine is described. The young woman prepares food, the youth works outside, and the old man, who is blind, plays an instrument or reflects in quiet contemplation. The creature is moved by the love and respect the younger cottagers show the old man, especially as they often weep together. Despite their apparent material comforts, such as a warm fire, delicious food, and fine clothes, the cottagers are not happy. The creature deduces that their sorrow comes from poverty, and he witnesses their struggle to provide for themselves, with the two younger members often going without food to care for the old man. Touched by their selflessness, the creature refrains from stealing their food as he had previously done. Instead, he forages for berries, nuts, and roots. He also finds ways to assist their labor, such as taking the youth's tools to gather firewood during the night, which results in the cottagers finding their firewood pile mysteriously replenished. The youth spends the next day repairing the cottage and tending to the garden, a sign of the family's deep care for one another. Over time, the creature begins to learn their language by observing the words they use and their connection to objects and feelings. He learns names for familiar things like fire, bread, and milk, as well as the names of the family members, Felix, Agatha, and the old man, whom they call Father. Though the creature struggles with the complexities of their speech, he is elated as he begins to understand their communication and forms a desire to express himself. As winter progresses into spring, the creature observes the changing seasons and the improvement in the cottagers' circumstances. Felix continues to work, Agatha performs domestic chores, and the old man walks daily, though his sightless condition limits his mobility. The creature, while still observing from his hovel, becomes increasingly fascinated by the family, especially Felix, who seems the saddest of the group. The creature longs to understand why Felix and Agatha are so unhappy despite their care for each other and their relatively comfortable life. The creature also becomes more self-aware, disturbed by his own monstrous appearance when he glimpses his reflection in a pool of water. This sight fills him with shame and despair, making him more determined to learn the language of the cottagers so he might one day communicate with them and ease his suffering. Frankenstein's creature reflects on the transformative nature of his experiences, which have shaped him into who he is. As spring arrives, the landscape changes from barren to lush, with beautiful flowers and greenery, stimulating his senses. He observes that Felix, a member of the family he has been observing, seems particularly sorrowful. One day, a lady named Safie visits the cottage, and her arrival brings great joy to Felix, dispelling his melancholy. Felix and the family warmly welcome Safie, and the creature notices how her presence brightens the mood in the household. Safie, although able to speak, does not understand the cottagers' language, and they, in turn, struggle to comprehend her. Nevertheless, she learns the language, and the creature observes her progress. He also focuses on his own learning, improving his ability to understand and speak. He masters the language much faster than Seyfi, and even begins to learn how to read, studying the book Ruins of Empires by Volney, which Felix had been using to teach Seyfi. He learns about the rise and fall of civilizations, the glory and ruin of empires like Greece and Rome, the development of chivalry, Christianity, and kingship. The creature is particularly moved by the fate of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, who were wiped out after the discovery of the continent by Europeans. This history of human conquest and oppression fills him with both wonder and sorrow. The creature is fascinated by the dual nature of humankind, noting that while humanity is capable of extraordinary virtue and nobility, it is equally prone to vice and cruelty. His readings help him understand the complexity of human beings, capable of both greatness and degradation. This sparks a deeper moral reflection within him as he compares the virtuous deeds of humans with their capacity for evil, such as murder and greed. Through Felix's teachings, the creature learns about human society's structure, including concepts like property, wealth, social classes, and the importance of lineage. He becomes aware that respect and social standing are often determined by one's descent and wealth, and how those without such advantages are often marginalized, treated as lower beings. These new lessons lead the creature to reflect on human nature, wondering how one can be so noble at times and so vile at others. He learns about society's divisions based on wealth, rank, and descent, and realizes that he has none of these things. He recognizes his own deformity and alienation, pondering whether he is a monster, disowned by mankind. His isolation and lack of human connection lead to great anguish. The creature is acutely aware of his grotesque appearance and feels repulsed by it. His reflection on his deformity leads him to despair, as he realizes that he is physically different from humans in a way that cannot be ignored. His size, his strength, and his agility, which set him apart from ordinary humans, only serve to isolate him further. He feels like a monster, an outcast from society, unable to find a place among them. The creature ponders his creation and feels a deep void in his understanding of his own origins. He has no knowledge of his creator, Victor Frankenstein, or any past relationships. Unlike the humans he observes, who have familial bonds, the creature has no history or connections to anyone. He recognizes the absence of a family who might have cared for him, no loving father or mother, no siblings or kin. This void fills him with a profound sense of loneliness. The creature is deeply moved by the love and affection that the cottagers share with each other. He observes how the old man dotes on his children, how Felix and Agatha share a bond of mutual care, and how Felix and Seyfi are clearly in love. These relationships stir in the creature a desire for the same warmth and companionship, but he knows that such relationships are closed to him because of his appearance and monstrous nature. The creature's self-reflection reaches a critical point when he questions his very purpose and existence. He grapples with the idea that if he is, as he believes, a monster, he may be doomed to a life of rejection and solitude. He is also haunted by the question of why he exists. What is the meaning of his life, and why was he created? The contrast between the beauty and warmth of the cottager's family life and his own isolation becomes unbearable. While the creature understands more than ever, the knowledge does not provide him with the comfort he had hoped for. Instead, it intensifies his anguish as he realizes that he will never be a part of the world he now understands so well. In Chapter 14 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein's creature learns the backstory of the de Lacy family, the elderly couple and their children who live in the cottage where he has been secretly observing. The tale is deeply moving and reveals themes of virtue, injustice, love, and betrayal. The old man de Lacy comes from a noble family in France and had lived a life of respect and comfort. His son, Felix, was raised in a position of privilege, and Agatha, Felix's sister, was part of high society. The family lived a comfortable life in Paris, but their fortune was ruined due to the actions of a Turkish merchant. The merchant, Safi's father, had been living in Paris for years but was imprisoned and condemned to death by the government. This was largely due to his wealth and religion rather than any crime he had committed, and this injustice caused a great deal of public outrage in Paris. Felix had witnessed the trial and was horrified by the unfair verdict. He vowed to free the Turk, Safi's father, and eventually discovered a way to communicate with the prisoner through a grate in the window of his dungeon. Felix offered to help the Turk escape, and in exchange, the Turk promised his daughter Safi's hand in marriage once the Turk was freed. Although Felix was initially hesitant to accept this offer, he became captivated by Safi, and the promise of her hand in marriage motivated his efforts. The Turk's daughter, Safi, had a rich and tragic background. Her mother was a Christian Arab who had been enslaved by the Turks and had taught Safi to value her freedom and intellect. When Safi's mother passed away, she feared being forced to return to a harem in Asia, a life that contradicted the noble aspirations instilled by her mother. The chance to marry Felix and live freely in Europe was very appealing to Safi. With the plan to escape set, Felix helped the Turk and his family flee Paris. They traveled through France and into Italy, where the Turk promised Felix that he would fulfill the marriage arrangement between Felix and Safi once they reached safety. However, once in Italy, the Turk deceived Felix and broke his promise. When word reached them that Felix's family had fallen into poverty and disgrace due to their involvement in the escape, Felix returned to Paris in hopes of rescuing them, but he was too late. His family was exiled, and they were left destitute. In the meantime, Safi's father, the Turk, forced her to prepare to return to Turkey after learning of Felix's fall from grace. Safi, outraged by her father's actions, decided to defy him and escape to find Felix. She took some of her father's jewels and money and made her way to Germany, where she eventually found her way to the de Lacy cottage. In Chapter 15 of Frankenstein, the creature continues to reflect on its self-education and growth. Having learned the basics of human language from observing the cottagers, it stumbles upon a leather portmanteau containing books and clothing in the woods. Among these books are Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Werther. These books become a source of intense emotional and intellectual development for the creature, although their effects are both uplifting and deeply distressing. The creature describes how Paradise Lost especially resonated with it, equating its own situation to that of Adam, albeit with much more isolation and suffering. While Adam was created perfect and had the opportunity for a connection with a higher being, the creature is abandoned, deformed, and rejected by society. The creature even considers Satan, who is similarly cast out and alone, as a more fitting emblem of its own existence, experiencing envy and bitterness as it watches the cottagers' peaceful lives. The creature also reads Plutarch's Lives, which introduces it to heroic figures from history. This book inspires feelings of admiration for virtuous leaders and disgust towards vice, contrasting with the creature's own grim reality. Through these readings, the creature begins to yearn for acceptance and compassion, but struggles with feelings of inadequacy due to its hideous appearance. It becomes clear that the creature, despite its intellectual progress, still remains a deeply isolated and outcast figure, unable to reconcile its inner desires with its external form. The creature recounts how, after months of observing the de Lacy family and improving his understanding through books like Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Werther, he is increasingly drawn to the idea of interacting with the family. He has learned about benevolence, generosity, and the ideals of human virtues, all of which he admires. Yet, despite his growing intellectual capacity, he remains an outcast, grappling with feelings of loneliness and self-loathing due to his monstrous form. As the months pass, the creature decides to take action and approach the de Lacy family, particularly the blind old man, de Lacy, whom he believes might be more compassionate. He believes that, without the distraction of his monstrous appearance, the blind man may listen to him and perhaps accept him. One day, when the family members leave the cottage, the creature sees an opportunity. He knocks on the door, and de Lacy, sensing the presence of a visitor, invites him in. The creature is careful with his words, telling the old man that he is a traveler in need of warmth and rest. De Lacy, who cannot see, invites him in and is kind despite the apparent strangeness of the situation. He offers the creature what little hospitality he can, acknowledging that he is blind and unable to offer food, but he can provide shelter and warmth. De Lacy's kindness is immediately evident when he speaks to the creature. Despite his inability to see, he offers what little he has, showing the depth of his character. He speaks kindly, "Enter, and I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants." The creature is struck by de Lacy's goodness, which contrasts with the hatred and fear he has encountered from others. The creature is initially nervous and unsure of how to begin the conversation. He feels that this moment will determine his fate, yet he hesitates and almost gives in to his self-doubt. He has planned to gain de Lacy's compassion, but as he sits in front of the old man, he struggles with how to proceed. At one point, DeLacy, unaware of the creature's appearance, asks questions based on his limited understanding. He assumes the creature might be a fellow Frenchman based on his speech. Prosody. By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countryman. Are you French? The creature responds, explaining that he was educated by a French family and is now seeking the protection of some French friends. This exchange reveals both the creature's desire for connection and DeLacy's willingness to engage with him despite his blindness. As the conversation continues, the creature is painfully aware of the fact that he is sitting in the presence of the only person who has treated him with kindness. However, the interaction is still filled with tension, as the creature wonders what will happen when DeLacy learns of his true appearance. The creature's internal conflict grows. He yearns for acceptance and kindness, but his monstrous form is a barrier he cannot overcome in the eyes of the family. The creature is ready to explain himself fully to the blind man. He wishes to confide in DeLacy, but before he can proceed with his narrative, the family members return home unexpectedly. This foils his carefully laid plans, as DeLacy's children, Felix, Agatha, and Safi, arrive just in time. The family's reaction to the creature is one of immediate fear and rejection. Felix, upon seeing the creature, attacks him with violent fury, calling him a monster and forcing him to flee to his hovel. Chapter 16 of Frankenstein focuses on the creature's deepening despair, isolation, and thirst for revenge after being rejected by the DeLacy family. The creature is overwhelmed by feelings of hatred toward his creator, Victor Frankenstein, and the world that has rejected him due to his monstrous appearance. After fleeing from the DeLacy cottage, the creature experiences a tumultuous emotional breakdown filled with rage and agony. He curses his creator, wishing he had never been brought to life. His feelings of anger are directed at both humanity and his creator for bestowing life upon him only to abandon him in such misery. His anguish leads him to wreak havoc in the woods, destroying anything in his path before collapsing in despair. As the sun rises, the creature hides and reflects on his actions, regretting that he had been too hasty in his attempts to approach the DeLacy family. He feels that if he had been more patient and revealed himself gradually to the old man, he might have won his sympathy. He resolves to return to the cottage and try again, believing his mistakes may be reversible. However, when he returns to the cottage later, he discovers that the family has left. Felix and a countryman discuss the family's departure, revealing that the DeLacys have fled due to the horror and danger caused by the creature's appearance. This news devastates him, leading him to further feelings of betrayal and abandonment. He becomes consumed by hatred and vows vengeance, even as he briefly experiences moments of gentleness and sorrow when recalling the kindness of the DeLacys. Unable to harm the family, he channels his anger toward inanimate objects, setting the cottage on fire and watching it burn. With no hope left in his heart, he decides to leave the area and head toward Geneva, determined to confront his creator, Victor. As he journeys through various hardships, including a dangerous wound sustained while trying to save a girl from drowning, the creature's bitterness intensifies. Despite saving the girl, he is shot at and wounded by a man, which only fuels his rage and desire for vengeance against humanity. The chapter concludes with the creature finally arriving at the outskirts of Geneva, tired, hungry, and bent on confronting Victor Frankenstein, who he believes is the only one who can offer him any form of justice, even though the creature's feelings toward his creator are now filled with hatred. In Chapter 17, the creature, who had been narrating his tale, demands that Victor Frankenstein create a female companion for him, someone with whom he can share the necessary emotional connection for his survival. The creature insists that only Victor, as his creator, has the power to fulfill this request, and he demands it as his right. Victor is initially shocked and angered by the creature's audacity, refusing outright, stating that he will not create another monster to worsen the world. Despite his fury, the creature counters by arguing that his malice stems from his misery and the rejection he faces from humanity. He expresses his longing for companionship, which would allow him to live peacefully with another creature like himself, far from humans, in isolation. He promises that, if granted his request, he and his companion would live harmoniously and peacefully, never to harm anyone again. Victor is moved by the creature's plea, acknowledging the possibility of some justice in the creature's request. The creature speaks of his past pain and the promise of goodness that could emerge from living with an equal. However, Victor remains conflicted, torn between his compassion for the creature and his deep mistrust. The creature assures him that once he has a companion, he will leave Europe and humanity forever, settling in the wilderness of South America, where they will live off the land in peace, away from human detestation. After much internal conflict, Victor finally agrees to the creature's demand, but only on the condition that the creature swears to leave humanity and never return. The creature swears by everything sacred to him and promises to never return to Europe if Victor fulfills his request. With that, the creature leaves quickly, vanishing into the mountains. Victor, weighed down by the enormity of the decision, spends the rest of the day in turmoil, struggling with the emotional weight of what he has agreed to. As night falls, Victor makes his way back to his home, feeling the burden of his actions. His journey is somber, and he is consumed by despair, lamenting the weight of his decision. When he reaches the village of Chamonix, he continues on to Geneva without rest, his mind in turmoil. Upon returning home, his family is alarmed by his haggard appearance, but Victor is too consumed with his internal agony to engage with them. He feels detached from his loved ones, believing he no longer deserves their sympathy, but he resolves to fulfill the creature's demand, setting himself on a path he detests. The thought of completing this task becomes his sole focus, overshadowing everything else in his life. In Chapter 18 of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein returns to Geneva after a prolonged absence, struggling to summon the courage to continue his work. He is haunted by the fear of the fiend's vengeance, but is also repelled by the task of creating a female creature, knowing it would require months of study. He contemplates traveling to England to learn of recent scientific discoveries that could aid his work, but his dread and the thought of further delay prevent him from acting. As time passes, his health improves and his spirits rise, though moments of deep melancholy still strike, sending him into isolation. During one of these lonely episodes on the lake, his father, seeing the improvement in Victor's health but concerned by his continued unhappiness, presses him about his emotional state. His father fears Victor may have lost his affection for Elizabeth, his longtime betrothed, and might be in love with someone else. Victor reassures his father of his deep love for Elizabeth, but he remains troubled. He wishes to delay their marriage because of the promise he made to create a companion for the monster, which weighs heavily on him. He cannot marry while this promise hangs over him, as he believes that the monster's torment will not cease until it is fulfilled. Victor decides to visit England to seek out knowledge necessary for his project, hoping to distance himself from the emotional turmoil and complete the task at hand. His father agrees to the trip, and Elizabeth, though distressed by Victor's melancholy, supports his decision. His father arranges for Victor's friend, Henry Clerval, to accompany him, much to Victor's chagrin, as he had hoped for solitude to focus on his work. However, Victor is somewhat relieved by the company, thinking it will keep the monster at bay. Victor embarks on his journey, feeling both anxious and detached. He travels through scenic landscapes, noting the contrast between his dismal mood and Clerval's enthusiasm for the beauty around them. As they travel down the Rhine, Victor is briefly uplifted by the picturesque views, even though his mind remains fixated on the grim task ahead. Clerval, full of life and joy, contrasts sharply with Victor, whose only solace lies in the completion of his unholy work. The chapter concludes with a vivid description of the landscapes along the Rhine, highlighting the tension between the beauty of the world and Victor's inner turmoil. Victor Frankenstein and Henry Clerval settle in London, planning to stay for several months. Clerval is eager to interact with prominent intellectuals of the time, while Victor's focus is darker and more singular. His primary goal is to gather the scientific knowledge needed to fulfill his promise to the creature, to create a female companion. Victor's letters of introduction grant him access to some of the era's most distinguished natural philosophers, but his interactions are tainted by the burden of his grim purpose. Victor contrasts his current state of despair with his past, when such a journey would have brought him immense joy. He feels isolated, haunted by the deaths of William and Justine, and unable to fully connect with others. Although he finds temporary solace in Clerval's lively company, Victor often chooses solitude to dwell on his inner torment, and focus on the horrifying task at hand. Preparing for his new creation feels like a relentless torture, each step filled with dread and regret. Meanwhile, Clerval thrives in London. His enthusiasm for learning and discovery mirrors the spirit Victor once had. Clerval dreams of aiding European colonization and trade by traveling to India, utilizing his linguistic and cultural knowledge. His vibrant personality is a stark contrast to Victor's gloom, and while Victor tries to hide his sorrow, Clerval occasionally senses the depth of his friend's suffering. In February, Victor and Clerval receive an invitation from a former visitor to Geneva, now residing in Perth, Scotland. He extols the beauty of the Scottish landscape and invites them to extend their travels northward. Clerval is eager to accept, and Victor, longing for the solace of nature, agrees. They plan a leisurely journey, avoiding major routes and taking time to explore Windsor, Oxford, Matlock, and the Cumberland Lakes before reaching Scotland in July. The pair leaves London in late March, spending several days in Windsor. The ancient forest, with its towering oaks and herds of deer, is a new and enchanting sight for the two mountaineers. They then proceed to Oxford, where the city's historical significance, particularly its role during the English Civil War, captures their imagination. They reflect on the events of the 17th century, including the loyalty of the city to King Charles I and the sacrifices of figures like John Hampden. The beauty of Oxford's architecture and surrounding landscape provides some distraction for Victor, but he remains deeply troubled by his past and uncertain future. From Oxford, they travel to Matlock, a village surrounded by picturesque landscapes reminiscent of Switzerland, though on a smaller scale. The area's natural history, exhibits, and caves evoke memories of Victor's homeland, bringing a mix of comfort and unease. The mention of Chamouni, a site tied to Victor's traumatic encounter with the creature, causes him to shudder and hasten their departure. Continuing north, they spend 2 months exploring Cumberland and Westmoreland. The mountainous terrain, snowy peaks, and cascading streams remind Victor of Switzerland, offering fleeting moments of peace. Clerval, on the other hand, flourishes in the company of talented locals, feeling inspired and invigorated. He expresses a desire to stay in the region permanently, captivated by its natural beauty and the intellectual stimulation it offers. However, their travels are not without challenges. Clerval observes that the constant movement of a traveler's life can be both exhilarating and exhausting. Just as they grow attached to the places and people they encounter, it is time to move on. As July approaches, they leave the Lake District to fulfill their appointment in Scotland. Victor, burdened by his secret project, views the journey with a mix of dread and resignation. He brings along his scientific equipment, resolved to complete his dark labor in the remote Scottish Highlands. Chapter 20 of Frankenstein is one of the most pivotal moments in the novel, where Victor Frankenstein makes a life-altering decision that seals his fate and the fate of others around him. The chapter unfolds with intense introspection, dramatic action, and a chilling confrontation between Victor and his creation. The chapter opens with Victor alone in his laboratory, debating whether to continue or abandon the creation of a female companion for the creature. As the sun sets and the moon rises, Victor becomes lost in a train of thought, recalling the horrors caused by his first creation. He reflects on the possible consequences of bringing a second creature into the world. Victor fears the female creature could be even more malevolent than her male counterpart. She might reject the original creature, leading to further misery for him. Alternatively, the two might procreate, producing a race of devils that could threaten humanity's existence. Victor questions whether he has the right to unleash such potential destruction for the sake of his own peace. He realizes that his earlier agreement with the creature was made under duress and begins to see the wickedness of fulfilling that promise. Overwhelmed by the gravity of his reflections, Victor resolves not to proceed. He tears apart the incomplete female creature in a fit of revulsion and moral conviction. As Victor destroys the female creature, he is startled to see the male creature watching him through the window. The creature's face is twisted in malice and treachery, and Victor realizes he has been followed across Europe by his vengeful creation. Seeing the destruction of his potential mate, the creature reacts with a howl of despair and anger, then disappears into the night. Victor locks the laboratory and vows never to resume the work. He retreats to his own quarters, haunted by the oppressive solitude and silence of the night. Later that evening, Victor hears the sound of oars and footsteps. His fear escalates when he recognizes the creature entering his quarters. The ensuing confrontation is filled with raw emotion and threatening exchanges. The creature accuses Victor of breaking his promise, recounting the suffering and sacrifices he endured in anticipation of his companion. He pleads for Victor to reconsider, but also issues dire warnings. Victor stands firm, declaring he will not create another being to perpetuate wickedness. He rejects the creature's threats and refuses to be swayed by fear or pity. The creature, enraged and despairing, vows revenge. He declares that Victor's happiness will be destroyed and ominously warns, "I shall be with you on your wedding night." This chilling promise foreshadows tragic events to come. Victor Frankenstein is brought before Mr. Kerwin, a benevolent yet stern magistrate, following his arrest on suspicion of murder. Mr. Kerwin's calm demeanor contrasts with the gravity of the accusations against Victor. The magistrate begins the proceedings by calling witnesses, and Victor listens to their accounts with mounting dread. A fisherman, his son, and brother-in-law, Daniel Nugent, recount their discovery of a corpse the night before. They describe a dark, stormy evening with a strong northerly wind. While walking along the shore near their landing site, the fishermen stumbled over the body of a young man. They initially assumed it was a drowning victim, but upon examination, they found the body was dry and warm, with visible finger marks around the neck, indicating strangulation. Despite their efforts to revive the man, it was clear he was already dead. Nugent claims he saw a lone figure rowing a boat away from the shore near the location of the body. He identifies the boat as the one Victor had recently used. A woman living near the beach supports Nugent's account, stating she saw a single man pushing off from the shore an hour before the body was discovered. Several witnesses confirm Victor's arrival in the same boat and suggest he might have struggled against the wind before landing again near the site of the murder. They also speculate he had transported the body from another location. Noting Victor's agitation during the testimonies, particularly when the strangulation marks were described, Mr. Kerwin orders Victor to view the body, suspecting it might elicit further reaction. Victor is horrified to discover that the victim is his closest friend, Henry Clerval. Overwhelmed with grief and guilt, he collapses onto the body, blaming himself and his murderous machinations for Henry's death. He cries out in anguish, lamenting that Clerval, a dear friend and benefactor, has become another victim of his monstrous creation. Victor's intense emotional reaction causes him to fall into convulsions. Victor succumbs to a fever that lasts for 2 months, during which he is consumed by guilt and torment. His delirium is marked by confessions of guilt for the deaths of William, Justine, and Clerval, as well as pleas to destroy the monster. Only Mr. Kerwin, who understands Victor's native language, fully grasps the extent of his ravings. However, Victor's cries and gestures frighten others caring for him. When Victor finally regains consciousness, he finds himself in a wretched prison cell, surrounded by the grim realities of incarceration. Disoriented and weak, he reflects bitterly on his circumstances and the unrelenting misfortunes of his life. An old, indifferent woman, hired to nurse him, coldly remarks on the likelihood of Victor's conviction for murder. Her unfeeling attitude deepens Victor's despair. Though physically recovering, Victor remains mentally and emotionally fragile. He questions the reality of his experiences, perceiving them as a disjointed nightmare. The chapter begins with Victor Frankenstein recounting the aftermath of his voyage back to France. The long and grueling journey had drained him physically and emotionally, and once he arrived in Paris, his health deteriorated. Victor found himself utterly unable to continue his travels without first resting and recuperating. His father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was devoted to Victor's care, doing all he could to nurse his son back to health. However, Alphonse remained ignorant of the true source of Victor's suffering, the guilt and horror over the deaths caused by the monster he had created. Alphonse, believing that Victor's melancholy was linked to social isolation, encouraged him to find solace in society and human interaction. However, Victor recoiled at the thought. Though he loved and valued humanity, he felt profoundly alienated, knowing he was responsible for unleashing a dangerous creature into the world. This awareness fueled his self-loathing and fear. He considered himself an outcast, unworthy of the company of others, since he had indirectly caused the deaths of William, Justine, and Henry. Victor confided some of his despair to his father, admitting that he felt responsible for the deaths of those closest to him. Alphonse was deeply confused by these declarations and suspected that Victor's grief had driven him into madness. Victor, unable to reveal the truth about his creation, feared that any explanation would lead others to see him as insane, or, worse, bring fear and disgust to their hearts. While he longed for sympathy and understanding, his guilt and shame kept him silent, forcing him to endure his torment in isolation. Despite Alphonse's efforts to distract him from his misery, Victor's thoughts remained consumed by his guilt and the monstrous consequences of his actions. Over time, he managed to compose himself outwardly, suppressing his turbulent emotions and appearing calmer to those around him. However, this composure came only through immense self-control and was a far cry from true peace. As Victor and Alphonse prepared to leave Paris for Switzerland, Victor received a letter from Elizabeth. Her message was filled with warmth and affection, but it also introduced an important question regarding their future. Elizabeth reflected on the long-standing plans for their marriage, a union arranged by their families since childhood. She confessed her love for Victor, but expressed her concern that he might feel bound to marry her out of a sense of duty rather than genuine desire. Elizabeth urged Victor to be honest about his feelings, even suggesting that she would step aside if his heart belonged to another. Her love for Victor, she emphasized, was selfless. She only wanted his happiness, even if it meant giving him up. Elizabeth's letter stirred mixed emotions in Victor. While her words reminded him of the joy and companionship she had always brought into his life, they also revived his fear and dread regarding the monster's ominous threat. Victor recalled the creature's chilling promise, "I will be with you on your wedding night." This declaration had haunted Victor since it was first made, as he interpreted it as a vow to destroy him or Elizabeth during what should have been a moment of happiness. Victor's mind raced as he considered the danger Elizabeth would face if they married. While he felt a growing determination to protect her, he also recognized the near inescapable power of the creature. He was tormented by the knowledge that any hope for happiness with Elizabeth might be shattered by the monster's vengeance. The chapter closes with Victor in a state of inner turmoil. He resolves to move forward with the marriage, but does so knowing the threat looms ever closer. His thoughts are consumed by both fear for Elizabeth's safety and the grim acknowledgement that his own actions have set this tragic chain of events into motion. Chapter 23 begins with Victor and Elizabeth arriving at their destination around 8 o'clock in the evening. They take a brief walk along the shore, enjoying the fading twilight before retiring to their inn. The natural beauty of the scene, forests, mountains, and the lake, is quickly overshadowed by ominous weather. A strong wind rises in the west, and the moon, high in the sky, becomes obscured by rapidly moving clouds. As the storm intensifies, rain begins to pour, mirroring Victor's growing internal dread. Although Victor appears calm during the day, the darkness stirs his paranoia. Gripping a hidden pistol, he becomes hypervigilant, imagining every sound to be a potential threat. His fears are rooted in the creature's earlier vow to exact revenge on his wedding night. Elizabeth notices Victor's agitation and hesitantly asks him about his fears. He dismisses her concerns, cryptically assuring her that the night will soon pass. However, his words only deepen her unease. Victor is torn between protecting Elizabeth and confronting the monster he knows is lurking. Realizing the potential trauma his confrontation could cause her, he urges Elizabeth to retire to her room for safety. Once she leaves, Victor begins a frantic search of the inn, inspecting every shadowy corner for signs of the creature. Finding nothing, he briefly allows himself to hope that the monster's threat might have been a bluff. Victor's fragile hope is shattered when a piercing scream echoes through the inn. Instantly, he realizes the truth. The monster's real target was Elizabeth. Paralyzed by horror for a brief moment, Victor finally rushes to Elizabeth's room. The scene is one of unimaginable devastation. Elizabeth lies lifeless on the bed, her pale features contorted in death, her neck bearing the fatal marks of the creature's hands. Victor is overwhelmed by grief, collapsing to the ground unconscious. When he regains consciousness, the inn staff are gathered around him, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and pity. Pushing past them, Victor returns to Elizabeth's body, now moved to a more peaceful position. For a fleeting moment, he imagines she might still be alive, but the coldness of her limbs and the unmistakable signs of violence dispel all hope. Consumed by despair, Victor clings to her lifeless form, mourning the loss of his beloved wife. As Victor grieves, a pale light from the moon suddenly illuminates the room, revealing the monster standing at the open window. Its hideous grin mocks Victor's anguish, and it points derisively at Elizabeth's corpse. Enraged, Victor grabs his pistol and fires, but the creature evades him with lightning speed, disappearing into the lake. Though Victor and the inn's staff launch a search using boats and nets, their efforts prove futile. Some dismiss the figure as a hallucination born of Victor's grief, but he knows the truth of what he saw. Exhausted and delirious, Victor attempts to join a search party combing the surrounding woods. His physical and emotional strength fail him, and he collapses, feverish and disoriented. The inn staff carry him back and place him in bed. Despite his weakened state, Victor's thoughts remain fixated on his mounting losses: William, Justine, Clerval, and now Elizabeth. Each death is a fresh wound inflicted by the monster, and Victor is tormented by the fear that his remaining family, his father and brother Ernest, may already have met similar fates. Desperate to protect his family, Victor resolves to return to Geneva immediately. With no horses available, he hires rowers to take him across the lake, despite the unfavorable wind and pouring rain. Though he takes an oar himself, his overwhelming grief saps his strength, and he is forced to abandon the effort. The familiar scenery, once a source of comfort, now feels alien and haunting. Memories of happier times with Elizabeth only deepen his sorrow. Victor reflects on the profound pain of sudden loss, lamenting that no one has ever been as miserable as he is now. Victor briefly recounts the aftermath of this traumatic night. He arrives in Geneva to find his father and Ernest still alive, though his own misery has reached its peak. He acknowledges that his tale has been one of unrelenting horror, leaving him desolate and stripped of hope. The chapter ends with Victor recognizing the irreversible destruction the creature has wrought upon his life, setting the stage for his final confrontation with the monster. The final chapter opens with Victor Frankenstein reflecting on the devastating events that have destroyed his family and life. After the murders of his loved ones, William, Justine, Clerval, and Elizabeth, Victor returns to Geneva, consumed by despair. He finds solace only in the presence of his father and younger brother Ernest. However, his father, Alphonse, is deeply affected by the loss of Elizabeth and succumbs to grief shortly after Victor's return. With his father's death, Victor feels utterly isolated, with Ernest being his only surviving relative. Victor resolves to dedicate his life to destroying the creature he created. He confesses the entire truth to a magistrate in Geneva, detailing the monster's creation and its reign of terror. Although the magistrate listens sympathetically, he dismisses Victor's plan to pursue the creature, deeming it impossible to apprehend such a being. Victor leaves, realizing he alone bears the responsibility to end his creation's atrocities. Victor begins a relentless chase, following the creature across Europe. The monster mocks and taunts Victor by leaving clues, such as written messages and destruction in his wake. These notes reveal the creature's intent to torment Victor further, by drawing him into an endless pursuit. The creature moves northward, heading toward the desolate Arctic regions, which he views as his natural home due to their isolation and harshness. As the chase progresses, Victor grows increasingly obsessed, his health deteriorating under the physical and emotional strain. He finds fleeting moments of relief in nature, but remains consumed by vengeance. Despite the suffering and the vast distances, Victor continues, driven by his need for retribution. Victor's narrative concludes when he meets Robert Walton, the Arctic explorer whose letters frame the novel. Found near death by Walton's crew, Victor recounts his tragic story to warn Walton about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. He urges Walton to learn from his mistakes, stressing that his obsessive desire for glory and discovery has led to his ruin. As Walton writes to his sister, Margaret Saville, he reflects on Victor's story and its implications for his own expedition. Walton initially shares Victor's ambition, but becomes increasingly conflicted as his crew faces extreme dangers in their pursuit of reaching the North Pole. The crew eventually demands that Walton abandon the mission and return home, valuing their lives over the glory of discovery. Walton reluctantly agrees, marking a stark contrast to Victor, who relentlessly pursued his goals despite the personal and moral cost. Victor dies on Walton's ship, exhausted and defeated. His final words express regret for his obsessive ambition, but also a lack of full repentance, as he never fully acknowledges the consequences of his actions on others. He urges Walton to continue the fight against the creature if the opportunity arises. After Victor's death, the creature appears aboard the ship, mourning his creator. In a surprising moment of vulnerability, the monster confesses his deep anguish and remorse for the destruction he has caused. He acknowledges that his quest for vengeance has left him hollow and bereft of purpose. With Victor dead, the creature resolves to end his own life. He declares his intention to travel to the northernmost ice and immolate himself, ensuring no trace of his existence remains to plague humanity. The creature departs into the Arctic wilderness, leaving Walton and his crew to speculate on his fate. Walton concludes his letters by expressing gratitude for his crew's safety and a newfound understanding of the limits of human ambition. He resolves to return home, humbled by the tragic lessons of Victor Frankenstein's life.